The sermon title, Perpetual Euphoria. Perpetual Euphoria. That is the title of a book by a contemporary French philosopher, Pascal Bruckner. Now, the title of the book, I've been looking at it on Amazon, where else, for a while in the philosophy section, and the title never enticed me until I took the time to read the subtitle, which I will get to. But the title always sounded to me like just another of those endeavors in the cottage industry around happiness that we are bombarded with. You know, the golden key to perpetual euphoria, to perpetual happiness, where gurus of different persuasions and forms and shapes and philosophies will tell you this is the golden key. Just do this. It's simple. Just buy this. It's even more simple, then you'll be happy forever. It's also part of many preachers' full assault on us with the prosperity gospel, etc. The subtitle is interesting, that made me buy the book and even started to read it towards the end of my vacation. It's not easygoing, like most French philosophers. This one is not an exception, and you should read it while you're awake, and not like I did, trying to do it late at night or so. The subtitle is On the Duty to be Happy. On the duty to be happy. And Bruckner's thesis or his argument is that what has been a beautiful Enlightenment principle, the pursuit of happiness and the right to do that, has in our day and time become an obligation. It is a duty. It is not just that some people are happy sometimes. If you are not happy all the time, then you are regarded as a failure. And we can think how we greet each other, and if we bother to respond to the question, how are you? Say, I'm good. Some people say, I'm fantastic. I have a friend who says that, I'm fantastic. Standard. Wonderful. Things are going well with everybody all the time. That is the gut response. That is the standard response when somebody asks you, how are you? And Bruckner says, we are conditioned now to always display this facade of happiness. He said, what has been accepted in the past as something that may come your way and in periods of time may grant you, if you are lucky, some happiness. It is now expected to happen to you all the time, and if it doesn't, there's something seriously wrong with you, especially in view of all the approaches offered where it boils down to you can make the decision to be happy. It's your decision. And if you don't make the right decision and you're unhappy, it's your mistake. It's your full responsibility. You carry the full extent and responsibility of your own misery and despair and unhappiness. We are not strangers to the concept of happiness. We find it in our Declaration of Independence as one of the inalienable rights that is mentioned there. Life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And once I started to read about what is meant by the pursuit of happiness, that is especially the instance when I discovered this is perhaps a topic for more able philosophers and people of greater capacity and ability than I have. But it seems to me that in the intent, in the time that it was written, it didn't guarantee you that you have the right to be happy. You had the right to pursue happiness, and pursuit of happiness probably meant something that you are actually called upon within the context of community and wider interests for the common good to work towards an ethical way of existence. So it is not this thing of a bunch of people sitting around somewhere listening to specific kinds of music, taking nourishment of a specific kind, or smoking something of a specific kind, and then experience happiness. It seems that there is more than an incentive, more of an obligation to strive to do what is good, and specifically to do what is good for people outside yourself, to strive towards a higher, probably a moral, ethical purpose. We also encounter this in the rest of, apart from that passage that we listen to, quite often in the Christian tradition. You read about joy, which is more often used instead of happiness. And the Apostle Paul is seemingly quite enticed by the concept of joy. Happiness and joy. Rejoice in the Lord, we listened to this morning again. In other faith traditions, it is also an important theme. If we think of Buddhism and the 14th Dalai Lama, who said the purpose of our existence is to be happy. That is the purpose of our existence. And I think we project as Westerners often our understanding of happiness into and onto the Buddhist understanding that he was talking about. Not that I would give myself out as somebody that understands that. But happiness in that tradition, as I understand it, means to be able to travel and grow in the path of separating yourself and detaching yourself from longing for desires and of being attached especially to material things. And in the process, being present in the moment, fully in the moment, while not being detached from a bigger environment. And that, I don't know how to hold those two contradictions in one place. I do think it is possible, but how to explain it logically, I'll leave to you. And I think that's worthwhile to listen to what the Dalai Lama had to say. In Islam as well, we find the concept of happiness firmly attached, what I understand, to beauty. And beauty especially in a moral sense, the internal beauty of ethical and moral living and striving to do what is good. In the Jewish tradition, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs is the one that I found very interesting, his few comments on this. He said, when you look at the Jewish tradition, if you read the Old Testament, he said, that joy and happiness is not what comes to the front immediately. He said it's kind of depressing literature. He said, and if you look at the Jewish tradition, you will find always a sense of gratefulness amid suffering, that you are able to celebrate life and to celebrate the love of God even though you are suffering. And he says the Jewish tradition, summarized in the 5 big festivals, will teach you that. He said you can summarize our whole tradition and history in the following way. He said it boils down to, they tried to kill us. Some of us survive. Therefore, let us eat. He said that is the Jewish tradition and wisdom. There is not only a cottage industry about happiness in the Western world. There is some serious and ongoing, decades-long research on the theme. From psychology to sociology, psychiatry, name the discipline. Happiness is the thing, studied by serious academics who publish serious articles about it. What comes out of, before I get to the result of this research, it is interesting that in the country of Bhutan, they don't have gross national product. They have gross national happiness, such an index. And again, I think one should be careful to project a popular understanding of happiness in the Western world onto that country. It boils down to the common good and general well-being of the population, especially along a developmental index. It has gained popularity also in the United Nations, where they have accepted the gross national happiness index as an indication of general well-being for populations and countries. Out of all this, and also confirmed by the research, the serious research that I spoke about, two things emerge. The one is that happiness for humanity and for human beings, for individuals, can only be found in connectedness, in community. The more community you have and the more connections you have, the happier you could be, the longer you will live, the healthier you will be. That is confirmed by the research. It is not a ploy being sold by somebody with a long beard and purple hair and a flowing gown, etc. This is confirmed by research. And the second thing that emerges from all the research and also these religious traditions, second thing is that happiness grows out of commitment to a purpose that goes beyond yourself. When you commit your life to something that takes you beyond your own direct interest, and when you commit yourself to a higher purpose beyond yourself, then happiness is something that has a greater probability of emerging from that. When we look at the specific passage written by Paul, probably around the year 62, to a church which was the first church that he started on European soil in a city called Philippi, still in the panhandle of northern Greece today. He seems to have a great affection for this congregation. And this congregation demonstrates, I think, characteristics of human congregations and communities. We read in the initial verses about two women, good church people that have labored with Paul, that have disagreements. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that is typical of congregations that the women have disagreements, even the ones that work hard in the congregation. That is just what Paul speaks about, illustrating, yes, even in this congregation that I have so much affection for, there we find the things that cannot be characterized in his words as demonstrating the fruits of the Spirit, expressing the love of God. Paul urges this community, this congregation, live with an openness to God's Spirit. Commit yourself to this higher ideal of living in and through God's love. Then what will emerge is gentleness and kindness. And he carries on with a full list of the fruit of the Spirit. And in this passage, Paul confirms what we find in the major traditions, religious traditions of the world, that we find also in our tradition. That happiness, authentic happiness, even though it is not guaranteed, a happiness that brings the gratefulness even in the face of suffering, is possible when we commit to community, in the first place with God's Spirit, and then to the people gathering around the love for God and the love for the people who agree to live in covenant and in agreement with one another to practice the love of God. Therefore, this morning and every day of our lives, instead of longing for perpetual euphoria, let us rid ourselves, as Bruckner calls it, of this duty and the obligation to always be happy. Let us, as God's people, approach life in the realism that flows from many traditions and also from our tradition and also from this passage. Live in openness to God's Spirit. Let yourself be transformed through that. And then we can express an authentic happiness that is able to continue to change us and to change the world around us. I wish you a happy Sunday without perpetual euphoria. Amen.